You did a piece in Jacobin on Social Security and the Social Security Administration and what's happening there. I wonder if you could share some of those details. They're really relevant to a lot of the people watching.
Yeah, I mean, the reporting that has come out in the last few weeks, basically, it sounds like an attempt to plunge the Social Security Administration, which governs the program, but then the program itself into basically dysfunction. What we're hearing is massive staff cuts. Initially, it was going to be 50%. Now they've kind of lowered it down to 12%, which is still thousands of people. It means the closing of in-person offices, Social Security Administration offices around the country that people go to process claims or disability things, or whatever they need to do in person. There was just reporting today that they are talking about maybe closing down telephone services for certain Social Security related needs. So the sum total of all this, if it actually gets pushed through, is that basically the Social Security will become far more dysfunctional, far less convenient, just far more difficult in every possible way to get your benefits, to be able to apply to get the benefits that you are owed as an American. And I think what the ultimate plan is to do is to point to this kind of chaos that is happening with the program, and then they can say, well, you see, look, the government is not able to do this. It can't actually administer a program of this size competently. The only thing we can do is privatize this, turn it over to a private company that will make money off it. And that's the way that you're going to be able to see your benefits continue to come regularly, and everything else that you've expected from the Social Security program.
I'm so glad that you mentioned it, because that is to say, the final goal, the strategy, what they're working toward, it seems so clearly something that they've wanted. They've articulated it in Project 2025. What was striking to me about leading with Social Security the way Musk has, and making it part of the conversation so early, and they've only been in power 6 weeks or whatever it's been, is that it does produce a public backlash that they didn't really want this early. Project 2025 and Russell Vogt talks about, as you well know, because you've reported a lot on this, Vogt sort of talks about, boiling the water slowly, handling Social Security on down the way. But some of these other institutions of government that don't affect the public right away, that they won't notice, if you want to put it that way, dismantling those first and then getting to Social Security. It's moving the agenda up, as Musk has, and going right after Social Security. That did surprise me.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly correct. Russell Vogt's plan, and as you say, he was a guy who his entire history, he wanted to take on Social Security. He believed it should be privatized. And I think he still does. But what he said to an interviewer a couple of years ago is basically, look, yeah, we want to get to this. We want to cut Social Security. We want to cut Medicare, and so on. But people are not going to accept that immediately. We have to kind of build up the political capital for it. And we also have to create a culture of spending cuts, so that eventually when we start doing this stuff, people have been kind of acclimatized to it. I personally think that that's nonsense, that there's no amount of cutting that is going to make people okay with eventually cutting their hard-earned benefits, Social Security benefits. But that is his theory. And you're right, they are completely exploring that now. I think the only difference would be, the only distinction I would make there is that Trump is continuing to say in public, I'm not going to cut Social Security. That was one of the things that made him kind of a rock star among Republicans in the first place, was that he was willing to say that when every Republican was for years saying we need to cut this program. He's still using that rhetoric, but I think what he has decided to do, or the people around him have decided to do, is rather than doing something like George W. Bush, where he tried to partially privatize the program or cut benefits or something like that, they've decided to do this kind of backdoor strategy for cutting the program. As I said before, the idea is that, well, we will just cut staff and services and close offices, and we'll say that we're getting rid of fraud and waste and so on. But actually what we'll be doing is we'll be cutting the program by making it unworkable, by making it so that people aren't qualifying for the benefits that they're owed, making it so that people can't actually get the disability and other claims that they are entitled to. I think that's what's happening. It's a cut by stealth.
It's fascinating because you've seen the first Trump administration inhabited by those who were uh, privatization opportunists, and we've also seen Social Security talked about in the privatizing of it or the changing of it by George Bush, the younger George Bush, talking about the fact that, we'll set up independent accounts for people and you'll have control over your own money. You'll be able to invest it on your own and you'll have control over your, look, that was all sort of a preamble to privatization. And he was cowed, I think, by public reaction. But these guys don't seem to be too affected by public reaction, Branko?
Yeah, I'm actually surprised because I would have thought that the Trump administration would, given the Project 2025, that seemed like it had been this intricately planned out strategy. I assumed that, as you say, they were going to get to this a little later on, and they were going to be careful around protecting their political capital, around not eroding the electoral mandate that they had from winning. But yeah, instead, it's been quite slapdash and chaotic, which has led to Trump actually having pretty negative approval ratings. I mean, I don't know if it's that they've convinced themselves that the reason that they won really wasn't to do with prices in the economy. It was something else. And so they can completely disregard people's economic concerns. But I mean, the result of it is that right now Trump has the worst economic approval ratings of his entire career. And when you look at polling, both during the election and subsequently, now when people are asked, what is it that you want Trump to focus most on? What is the most important thing? People say the economy. And then when they're asked, do you think Trump is actually focusing on the economy enough? A very small minority of people say yes. And that is not a good sign for him. We're not even 2 months into his administration. If things are looking this bad this quickly, when you're meant to be in a kind of honeymoon period, you can only imagine how much worse it's going to get in the coming year.
Yeah, his picking of fights with nations that we don't really have a hostile relationship with. I mean, essentially, Canada and Mexico for starters, and then, of course, the European Union. It doesn't seem to fit into any kind of blueprint that I'm aware of. I mean, I understand he was talking about tariffs, and I was mentioning earlier in the show that I think a lot of the Wall Streeters and the business community that did vote for Trump in large numbers, and I was hearing this a lot, he's not serious about tariffs. He likes to smack talk like that, but he's not serious. But here we are on the day in which heavy tariffing is going into effect.
Yeah, I mean, Trump seems to have been enamored by William McKinley, and he seems to have really taken on tariffs. Going by that historical example, he's taken it on as part of his political identity. The question is, what is the purpose of all of this? And that is not clear to me. It certainly has not been made clear to the public. I think Trump has issued, at least 3 different explanations, ranging from opioids to, immigration to other things. Basically, no one really knows what the actual end result of this is. I mean, I would presume that the idea is to onshore, to reshore American manufacturing, and basically make it harder for foreign-made goods to be sold here, make it easier for domestic industry to be built up. The thing is, though, I mean, tariffs are only one part of that. Yes, tariffs can be used to do that, but you also have to invest in domestic industry. And from what reports are saying, Trump is also cutting the bureaucracy involved in the CHIPS Act. He's kind of attacking that part of Biden's agenda, which was the other piece of that. That was, providing these large, generous government subsidies to private manufacturers to be able to set up in the United States. So if you're on the one hand harming that, but then just cranking up tariffs on foreign-made goods, I'm not sure if you're going to get the kind of domestic onshoring that he's hoping for. You might just end up getting way higher prices for the same goods that people were buying in the first place.
Certainly, I think in the short to medium term, I don't see any way that that won't be the case. But as you say, the long term goals may not be even served by some of this, or by any of this. There's a chaotic quality to everything that is going on right now, and I think in that chaos and sort of this fire hose of stuff that's happening in Washington, both on the Musk side and on the Trump side, it's hard to sort of make a coherent argument for this being a plan of any kind that has, is underpinned by a sensible goal. It just seems to be so much in the way of attention getting and a power flex. That's the way I see a lot of this, Branko.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an open question, what exactly is going on. My interpretation is, yes, I think there is a big part of it is the kind of showmanship and the drive for media and attention, 100%. I think also, Trump is a guy who famously has been all over the place politically. He was a Democrat, he became a Republican, he was very pro-choice, then he suddenly became very anti-choice when he had to run. He's very ideologically flexible. I am not sure if he really has any strong ideological commitments, maybe one or two, but it seems like a lot of it is up for grabs. I think he's a guy who mostly is just after a win. And he has surrounded himself with people who I think have accurately realize they can use him as a vehicle to get what they want done. When I wrote about Russell Vought, that was basically the argument I made. Russell Vought very cleverly recalibrated the way that he spoke about issues. Once Trump had become a national figure, he recalibrated it to sound a lot more Trumpian. It was still the same agenda. He wanted to privatize Social Security. He wanted to cut entitlements. He wanted to basically dismantle the entire federal government. But now, instead of using that kind of Reagan-esque rhetoric about small government and how government of all kinds is an enemy of the people, he started talking about we need to get rid of the woke and weaponized bureaucracy. We need to get rid of DEI and so on and so forth. And all of that is now being used as a way to kind of slash regulations, to get rid of government agencies like the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And so what I wonder is, is Trump basically, he has these people around him who are just whispering to him whatever their particular agenda is. And he is just basically going along with it, even if, it may not line up with some of the things that he has historically talked about, like, restoring American manufacturing.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I think and that does check out with him sort of regurgitating what he heard in the last hour type thing. He's very, much of, I feel, a product of that kind of thing. We were talking in the last hour, and I was talking about the fact that Bernie Sanders really shows Democrats how to speak. I think he's a great spokesperson. And the guest we had on said he's not relevant anymore. He's past his expiration date. And I said just the opposite. No, he's super relevant. He knows how to communicate, and Democrats, he could teach a master class in communication. This is the guy. Now, the reason I mentioned this to you, Branko, you did a piece, I believe, on Bernie Sanders. I read it a while ago, and you talk about the fact that he does galvanize people, even people who feel like really depressed about the situation we're in right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny for me to hear that, the idea that he's not relevant anymore. I mean, he has toured a bunch of rural and small towns in the Midwest over the last couple of weeks where he has drawn enormous crowds. I mean, I think it was in Michigan. They had not just an overflow crowd, but an overflow and then an overflow crowd. 9,000 people, I think. So I think, Sanders himself, he's obviously not going to run for re-election. He's not going to, rather run for the presidency again. He's been very clear about that for years. But I do think that the arguments, the points that he's been making for decades, for his entire career, I think the way that he communicates, I think that the alarm that he is raising, which is not just about, kind of nebulous warnings about Trump authoritarianism and so on, which, don't get me wrong, are valid, but are connected to talking about political economy and the way that the economy has been taken over by billionaires and by the ultra rich in general. I think that stuff is resonating, which is why you're seeing these massive crowds of people who, I was at one of these rallies to report on it. These are not people who are, far left activists or what have you, whatever the Democratic officials want to tell themselves. These are ordinary Democrats. I had a couple of friends who went to the rally in Wisconsin, in Kenosha, Wisconsin last week, and they said that over there was actually a mostly older crowd. And I think what that reflects is that people, particularly Democratic voters, are looking for some kind of direction. I think they're really dissatisfied and disappointed with the leadership of the current Democratic Party. They don't feel like they are fighting hard enough. They do not feel like they have a very potent message. And I can't blame them. I just watched this clip of Alyssa Slotkin, the senator from Michigan, who has been kind of elevated as the Democrats' spokesperson in recent weeks, because she is supposedly able to speak to disaffected voters and Trump voters in the working class. And she was on The View, and she's explaining why Trump won. And her explanation is that, the U.S. is in its teenage years as a country. It's only 250 years old. It's in its teenage years. Its brain is still fully forming, and teenagers, they act in kind of unpredictable and volatile ways. Not only is this incredibly condescending and insulting to people who may have voted Trump for a variety of reasons, out of hopelessness or desperation or what have you. It's also just completely nonsensical. I don't think that does not explain anything that is going on right now. And I think that kind of messaging is where the party is. And I don't think it's really resonating with people as much as talking about things like oligarchy, talking about the control of institutions by the ultra rich.
Sure. It's the billionaire boys club come to Washington, and Bernie calls that out. He calls this is ruled by billionaires. They are corrupt, and they're making decisions that are based on corruption. You need to say billionaire and corruption. You need to say it over and over and over again, and it will track. The ideas I didn't catch that. Oh, we're the adolescent nation, and so we're acting as adolescents. Yeah, so the tariffs are really us hitting on Canada because we're hot for Canada. That's really what's going on here. So, wow, I have a whole different vision of America now because I realized that we're all a bunch of teenagers. Pretty crazy. Well, look, I love that you visit with us. Really enjoy your reporting. And what are you working on now at Jacobin? You have anything that for the next?
I've been obviously very concerned by the Mahmoud Khalil arrest and detention, as I think everyone in America.
Let's speak about that for a second. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, look, people who aren't familiar with the case, this is a permanent resident. He has a wife. His wife is 8 months pregnant. He's a green card holder. He happened to be the leader of one of the protests at Columbia University. He was the lead negotiator between the protesters who opposed the war in Gaza and U.S. support for it, and the university, in an attempt to get the university to divest from Israel. Whether you agree with him or not, and I do agree with him, but whether you do or not, the administration has made very clear they arrested him. They said, we're revoking your green card, we're deporting you. They sent him over 1,000 miles away from New York to Louisiana, to a facility that is riddled with scandals about his treatment of detainees. And they're doing it all on the basis of, not that he committed a crime. They've shown no evidence he's committed a crime. In fact, a Trump official told an outlet earlier this week that, no, he didn't. It's not that he committed a crime. It's that his views are detrimental to the foreign policy of the United States, and so they are for that reason targeting him and getting rid of him. Now, as I and many others have said, doing this to a permanent resident, saying we don't like that you were at a protest, or we don't like the things that you say or believe about Israel, which is a foreign country, by the way. Let's remember, and so therefore we are going to just revoke your right to be in this country. We're going to revoke your green card and send you packing. That is a incredibly radical and dangerous attack on free speech that everyone should be alarmed by. Even if you are conservative or an Israel supporter and you think, I'm fine with them doing that to this guy, there is nothing, if that president is allowed to stand, there's nothing stopping a future president who you don't agree with from doing the exact same thing to someone, an activist or a journalist or some kind of public speaker, doing the exact same thing and getting rid of it. That's a very dangerous thing. I think a very, very, very alarming step that I don't think we've seen before in this country.
I think you're 100% correct. I mean, the idea somehow that a president could do it. A president could just say that person or that group of people, they are enemies of the state. They're enemies of the people, whatever. I mean, they're making the terms up. I mean, and the president, of course, completely covered by the cloak of immunity as given to him by the Supreme Court, is able to declare that. He could declare you or me. And there's no due process associated with it. And now, the latest on this, though, is I thought that he was originally going to be deported, and now it looks as though he's not going to be deported. Just update me on the very latest with him.
Yeah, well, obviously there was a huge public outrage about this, and his attorneys worked very quickly to basically file a petition to stop it. So a judge has now stated, and so I think at this point, I don't know the exact up-to-date news on it, but for the moment, he is not going to be deported. He is going to have to be put in front of an immigration judge. I think the case is probably going to last a little while. I've seen people say it could last years, for instance.
But then there is some kind of due process-ish thing going on. I mean, and he'll likely have representation that will be stout. And I think, well supported because of what he represents, because of what you've described. It's interesting that de Hagwell says, but terrorists like the Tate brothers are fine to bring here. It is weird. We have this bizarre double standard right now. Yeah.
I mean, I would encourage people to go and actually watch or read the reporting or watch the videos people have compiled of this individual, Mahmoud Khalil. What all the people who want him kicked out say is they say, oh, he's a Hamas supporter, he's a terrorist, he hand out terrorist material, so on and so forth. They say all these terms, I think, as an attempt to just distract people from actually trying to see for themselves and just sort of scaring them into agreeing with this action. In reality, I mean, the interviews that Khalil has done with the news over the situation in Colombia are very reasonable. It's a young man calmly talking about what the demands of the protesters are, which is to end U.S. support for this horrible war that we were watching in Gaza, and also to get the university to divest from any Israeli institutions. None of it's about Hamas. Hamas doesn't even come up. I've actually seen people just spread videos of completely different protests and completely different protesters and just lie and say it was him because they can't actually find anything neither incriminating nor damning about this person. And I'll just add one more thing, which is that it turns out Khalil worked for 4 years in the British embassy in Beirut. And so, he was working on very sensitive matters for the British government. You do not get that kind of job if you are someone with extremist views or links to extremists. And by the way, to become a permanent resident, to get your green card, you have to go through a national security check anyway. So the idea that he got his green card in 2024 because the government decided he wasn't any sort of national security risk, and then just a few months later, he becomes this horrible, scary terrorist threat, I think is pretty unbelievable.
Branko, thanks. Great stuff. You can read more of Branko at Jacobin. It's Jacobin.com, right?
Jacobin.com.
Yeah, Jacobin.com. And I look forward to talking to you again. Thank you, my friend.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me.
All right, all the best. Branko Marcetic. Yeah, right on.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.